So I guess we'll get started. I wanted to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Rose Faghih. Let me just get my notes up here. So Dr. Faghih is an associate professor here in the biomedical engineering department. She directs the computational medicine laboratory. Prior to joining NYU, she was an assistant professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Houston, and then she received her bachelor's summa cum laude from the University of Maryland. She then went on to get her master's and PhD at MIT, and then her postdoctoral training also jointly between MIT and Massachusetts General Hospital. Dr. Faghih is the recipient of many awards, so I had to write it all out just so I could remember them. So she's the recipient of the MIT Technology Review 2020 Innovator Under 35 Award, the 2020 National Science Foundation Career Award, the 2020 Research Excellence Award, the 2020 Teaching Excellence Award the Teaching Excellence Awards from the University of Houston's Cullen College of Engineering, and the 2016 IEEE USA New Face of Engineering Award, the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship, an MIT Graduate Fellowship, the University of Maryland's Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering Chairs Award, and she was featured in 2020 in IEEE Women in Engineering magazine as a woman to watch. So we are very, very honored to have Dr. Faghih with us today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. And I'm honored to be able to share my research with all of you here. The focus of this talk is going to be on basically algorithms for smartwatches of the future, such that we can infer and regulate brain state. So basically take a smartwatch and make it a brain-computer interface. This is a joint work with my current and former PhD students and funded by the National Science Foundation. So to just give you some background, I was trained in two different labs at MIT. One of them focuses on information and decision systems and controls, and then the other one on medicine, neuroscience, and statistical signal processing. So with that background, when I started my own lab at the University of Houston in 2017, I decided to focus on wearable technologies and wearable computing. So if you think of the research, basically it includes three major components. One is we take pulsatile physiological signals that you can currently collect from wearable devices that are commercially available. For example, skin conductance response, or we take pulsatile physiological signals, which currently you cannot collect in a wearable device, and we rely on clinical data or data from portable devices, but there are multiple labs that are building sensors for basically enabling having smartwatch architectures that can collect such signals. For example, cortisol hormone is one example. Besides that, you can think of leptin hormone or growth hormone. So basically electrical and biochemical signals. And so these signals are pulsatile, and they have information about the brain activity. So we first develop basically algorithms for inferring the underlying neural stimuli from these pulsatile physiological signals. Then once we have this information, we develop different decoders to estimate hidden states related to one's brain function and also health. Then once we have this information, we design controllers to basically close the loop and regulate this hidden state. In our lab, besides designing these control algorithms, in terms of the skin conductance response, where we can collect the data very easily in experimental settings in the lab, we then use different types of actuators, such as music or drinking coffee or breathing exercises to close the loop, basically. And then you have the clinical application, for example, related to cortisol. So that one, we are relying on clinical data, but basically for closing the loop, we just take medication dynamics and we do simulation studies. And we have not tested those in humans. So here you see two example applications that I'm going to focus on in today's talk. The first part of the talk is going to be on investigating cognitive stress and particularly arousal by taking skin conductance response. So as someone gets aroused due to psychological factors, there are very tiny changes in their sweat activity. So you have these micro fluctuations. These are very, very small changes that we do not feel. But if you put two electrodes on the skin, we can measure the changes in the conductance of the skin. So from a systems perspective, you can think of it as you have these arousal events, which are sparsely coming from the brain. And then you can think of the sweat glands doing a convolution operation. And then you have the skin conductance response that you can collect using a commercially available wearable device. So now we can do a deconvolution, and we develop different deconvolution algorithms. I'm just going to show you one example today to recover the underlying neural stimuli, the underlying arousal events. Once I have this information, I take basically the arousal events, and sometimes we have different sets of decoders with some other biomarkers related to skin conductance response, or you can think of heart rate, which also has information about arousal. And then we decode the hidden arousal state. Once we have this information, then we have done basically some control design first in simulation studies. Then we have used something like music to close the loop and regulate one's arousal level. Then, if you think of the other application area that we have been focusing on, it's hormones. So one example hormone is cortisol. Cortisol is a stress hormone, and it is high during the day. It's low at night. It has a circadian rhythm, and basically, if you think of your energy levels, you have higher energy levels during the day when your cortisol levels are high. You have lower levels of energy at night when the cortisol levels are low. So now we take cortisol and then we infer the underlying activity coming from the hypothalamus in the brain. Once we have this information, we build decoders to estimate this energy state, which is related to this stress hormone cortisol. And then we have basically been using medication dynamics and designing controllers to close the loop. So the big picture here is really, if you want to think of someone's basically cognitive arousal levels or different brain states, one way to do that is to take an EEG PET set and collect the data. So that's the gold standard. It's basically direct brain activity. But if you think of your everyday life, it is not feasible for everyday life. Now, if you think of someone with a mental illness, then it's not going to be practical for them to basically use an EEG device and walk around basically in their daily life. So now the goal is to enable a smartwatch to seamlessly infer brain activity and also regulate brain states. And for this research, I was selected to MIT Technology Review's 2020 Innovators Under 35, and also I received the NSF Career Award on this MindWatch project. So here I show you two example basically experiments that we did in our lab to first show that we can infer the arousal level using skin conductance response. The second one is showing that we can use music to regulate arousal and basically close the loop. So here you see skin conductance response that was collected in our lab, and then we basically inferred the underlying arousal events, and we decoded the level of arousal here. Then we are also defining this arousal index, which basically is low during a low arousal task, and then it is basically high during the high arousal task. So concurrently, we collected FNIRS data, which is basically investigating the blood flow. And here we collected the data from prefrontal cortex over here because it has information about one's arousal levels. And we basically took a moving average of the energy of all these channels in the prefrontal cortex. So that's the brain signal we collected. And so basically skin conductance response and FNIRS data were collected concurrently. First, the subject performed a low arousal task. Then we had basically a rest period. Then the subject performed this high arousal task. And as you can see, the decoded skin conductance response is low during the low arousal task, which is in agreement with the FNIRS data, and then it's high during the high arousal task, which is in agreement with the increase in the FNIRS data. Yes, please.
And the functional near spectroscopy, are you actually monitoring the blood flow in real time? And how are you doing that? Are you fixing a vessel out of the system, or how are you getting into it?
No, so basically we have the FNIRS device that we are basically non-invasively putting basically on. So it's like it's very similar to an EEG device. And the analysis here that I'm showing, actually, it was not real-time processes. It was offline processing for this particular example. And then the other application, yes, please.
So and that's just to train the smartwatch. The smartwatch can do it in real time.
No, so this part actually was to show that if we collect the brain data independently, analyze it, and then we collect the skin conductance data concurrently, but independently analyze it, we can basically obtain the same type of information. So it was not used for training the smartwatch. It was just to show that regardless of which one that we use, we're going to have exactly. And then the other basically example that you see here, we had another experiment where we collected skin conductance response from the right side of the body, the left side of the body. We also collected heart rate. And then using these three observations, we designed our decoder. The experimental setup was such that first the subject was at rest. Then the subject was exposed to this stressful video over here. So this stressful video is basically supposed to cause fear in the subject. So these subjects have fear of heights, and then these particular videos cause fear of heights in the subject. So in the second half of the exposure to this video, we start playing relaxing music for the subject. And then we also continue doing so after basically the exposure to the stressful video is complete. So now if you look at basically the decoded arousal levels, you have a lower level of arousal in the rest period, then it increases during exposure to the stressful video. And as we start playing relaxing music, can lower the level of arousal, which is basically decoded based on our observation. And then it decreases even more when we play relaxing music for the subject, but we stop exposure to the stressful video. So as you can see, music can be used as an actuator to regulate arousal. But this can find different applications. So one application area can be optimizing productivity in smart workplaces. The reason is that, so if you think of someone's performance, in psychology, basically they have something called the inverted U law, which is basically if you take someone's performance, the performance is a function of arousal. So now, if someone has a very low level of arousal, they're going to be bored, not engaged, not have the best performance. Then if someone has a very, very high level of arousal, they are going to be stressed and they're not going to have the best performance. There is this mid-range for arousal that gives you the best optimal performance. So now, if we regulate one's arousal, we can modulate their performance. That's why one application area is optimizing productivity in smart workplaces. And later during this talk, I'm going to have a demo video showing you that we have used two types of music, one high arousal, one low arousal type of music. And then we see we can change the performance just by changing the background music in a working memory experiment. Then another application area is maximizing cognitive engagement and learning in online and in class environments. And that's very similar to performance in the sense that, again, one's basically learning is a function of their arousal levels. Another application area which is more related to mental health is aging in place in a smart home setting. So if you think of elderly, if they are depressed, then we can detect low level of arousal due to depression. And then you can either make changes in the smart home setting, for example, changes in the light or playing music or a phone call from a loved one. So in that sense, basically, that's like a mental health application area. Then pain management is another application area. So now to just introduce you more to this area of research, I'm going to show you a video that was created by my former PhD students in 2019 when I was a faculty at the University of Houston. So let's watch this video together.
Stress activates both the sympathetic nervous system and the HPA axis in the human body. The sympathetic nervous system affects a large number of organs, including the heart, lungs, liver, and intestines. The HPA axis releases a number of hormones in response to stress. Cortisol helps give the body more energy in response to an external stressor. You don't just sweat after exertion. Your body also releases tiny amounts of sweat in response to arousing stimuli. Unpleasant things which you don't have much control over lead to stress. Work is a source of stress for many people. Epidemics caused by viral and bacterial infections have accounted for several million deaths over the past few centuries. There are a number of things you can do to counter stress, such as maintaining a healthy work-life balance. Wearable devices can also help manage stress by monitoring physiological changes. The human body is a system, and we can use system theoretic concepts to discover underlying phenomena. Brain activity, in addition to other signals, tells us a lot about a person's mental condition, such as workload. Functional near-infrared spectroscopy measures blood flow changes in the brain and can be used to identify mental workload. The hormone cortisol is released in pulses, and blood cortisol measurements have an impulse profile. Neural impulses also underlie skin conductance signals. We can recover the neural impulses underlying cortisol and skin conductance using optimization and compressed sensing methods. We relate the neural stimuli to stress through a statistical model and use it to figure out how stressed out a person is. We use state estimation and expectation maximization to recover a person's stress profile from their skin conductance. Fuzzy logic control can be used to model stress management. We use two different real-world data sets for mental stress detection and validation. We're able to recover neural stimuli quite well with our model, and then use it to estimate a stress level. We could also recover a person's stress level as they drove along toll roads, highways, and in the city. Fuzzy control was able to lower stress when deemed too high. It was also able to increase arousal when too low. We use the deconvolution strategy for estimating cortisol pulses in patients. We were also able to estimate energy and apply corrective control to a simulated patient model. The technology could be used in deep brain stimulation therapy. We would like to extend the models in the future to include other signals and develop a smartphone app for wearable monitoring.
So as you can see, stress is a big problem, and it is linked to cardiovascular disease or loss of productivity. So stress is basically a function of different factors. One of them is arousal, and today the main focus of this talk is going to be on arousal. So again, if you think of one's sweat activities, of course, it has to do with the thermal regulation. But besides that, due to changes in the psychological arousal, we have these micro changes in the sweat activity. So now if you basically think of it from a systems perspective, you have the autonomous nervous system activation, and then you have these arousal events that go through the sweat glands, and then basically we have this convolution operation. This gives us this phasic component of the skin conductance response, which is basically a very fast changing signal. Then we have another tonic component, which is like a baseline, slowly changing component. They get added to each other. That's what we can collect using a wearable device. So now, if we remove the tonic component, we can do a deconvolution to recover the underlying arousal events coming from the brain, and also the underlying coefficients based on the person's specific sweat activity. And if you think of these arousal events, they are sparse compared to the skin conductance response that we can collect. So what we are going to do is we are going to use this sparsity in developing our deconvolution algorithm to be able to solve this problem. Because, you know, if you think of the arousal events, you don't know their timing, you don't know their amplitudes, and you don't know how many of them have occurred. So now if we use sparse recovery without having to put any constraints on the interarrival times or the amplitudes, we can recover the underlying arousal events. And besides that, if we collect multi-channel data, and some of that is going to be very noisy, we can basically systematically have a state space model where we can kind of interpolate that noisy data and overcome some of the challenges with the noise. So here I'm just showing you an example where we have two channels, but the methods can be used on basically n number of channels. So you have the arousal events coming from the brain. And now in this example, we have data from the hand and the foot. So if you think of hand versus foot, you have more sweat glands in the hand compared to the foot. So in our model, basically, we need to include a gain term to factor for the number of the sweat glands. Besides that, the distance that you have to travel for the information to get from the brain to each location is going to be different. So then we need to also include a time delay in our model. But other than that, basically, we have the same input and we have a similar convolution operation happening in the sense that basically it's like the skin properties of that particular person. So this is going to give us this phasic fast changing component. Then we have also the tonic component, which is this slowly changing component in different locations of the body. And we're going to basically include this sparsity in the underlying input in our framework to be able to recover these arousal events. So here in the example that I'm showing you, we first have removed the tonic component, and then we have used a dynamical system model for skin conductance response, which was previously validated in the literature, with the difference that now we have included a time delay and also a gain factor to include two different locations in the body. And then with that, we basically write down the combined state space model, and then we solve this state space model. So basically, when we solve it, we have our noisy observation in the hand and the foot, which are a function of the underlying coefficients for the sweat activity, and also this sparse input. Yes, please.
I wonder if, for example, every time you wear that, the distance from the brain to the sensor might be different. Does that affect the temporal delay or something? For example, if I move the sensor 1 centimeter further.
So I mean, like if we have done like any experiments with like multiple locations. So, the experiments so far we have done, we have taken right side and left side and just put it like the exact same location, which doesn't have any time delay. And then we have used like hand and foot data, but we are planning on doing experiments exactly like based on what like you pointed out, to basically have multiple sensors, so like multiple channels right next to each other, and then do further investigations.
Is there any mechanism, for example, predicting or calibrating or registering the delays automatically?
So everything basically is done automatically, and it's basically person specific. So basically it's estimated for that particular individual. Yes. So basically now what we have done is we have started with the physiological model, and then we have simplified it to this sparse input U is going through our system, and then we have noisy observations. So now here we have formulated this optimization problem where we are considering two channels. We are minimizing the error in feeding each of these two data sets by considering the noise for that particular channel. And then we are also including the sparsity constraint using the L1 norm. Then we have some physiological constraint based on the sweat activity. And we basically do this deconvolution by iterating between estimating the sparse underlying neural stimuli and the underlying coefficients until convergence. So here I'm just going to show you first example simulated data estimation results, then experimental results. So here you have the skin conductance response from the hand, which is simulated. So we know the ground truth. The ground truth is in gray, and then the recovered stimuli is in red. So as you can see, these are in good agreement. Yes, please.
Sorry, I'm not to miss this, but where does the ground truth come from? Like, is it from the cue of the music, or?
So here I'm going to show you the experimental data. So basically, this is what we did. So in the experimental data, we have auditory stimulation, which is supposed to be disturbing to the subject and result in an increase in the level of arousal. So we have done the convolution on that. And then based on the results that we obtained, then we went back and simulated the data. And so besides like what I'm going to show you for the auditory stimulation, for example, we have used also data for fear conditioning, fear extinction experiments, which I don't know if like anyone is familiar with that, but the idea is for those experiments, it's used in psychology. So every subject basically is given electric shock. The electric shock is going to be person specific. So basically they start at a very mild electric shock. They keep increasing it until it's going to be bothering the subject a little bit, but it's safe for them. And so that is like another type of, like event that then we have the ground truth, because so auditory stimulation is one, but basically the electric shock is another one. So then that's how like we have the ground truth, like, and then we have been analyzing experimental data, and then we have been simulating data and adding noise that was corresponding to each experiment, and then tested it on the simulated data as well. Yes, please.
Sorry, just a quick question. Is the skin conductance susceptible to movement, like the measurement?
Yes, and so that can be a big challenge, and that's why basically we would like to include multiple channels from multiple locations, because so we have been doing experiments in our lab using research grade portable devices and then wearable devices. The quality of the research grade portable devices is a lot better compared to the wearable devices, because really the quality of the data depends on how these electrodes are touching the skin. So in a wearable device, basically, if you don't put it on properly with movement, then you can change the level of the contact between the electrode and the skin. So the quality of the data is not as good as the portable research grade equipment. So now we are working on also developing algorithms that can include a model of motion or breathing, because if you take like a very deep breath, that can also impact your skin conductance response. So to reduce the level of noise in the data, but it really depends. Like if you want to use like a wearable device, the quality of the data with single channel is not really good. That's why, like, to just double check, like we collect, for example, data from both the right and the left side of the body. And these algorithms like really work well currently on high quality wearable data or portable research device data that you don't have a very high level of motion artifacts. So, thanks. So now we do the convolution on the foot data. So foot data, the quality of the data is not as good as the hand data because you have fewer sweat glands in the foot. So when we do the deconvolution, as you can see, the quality of the results compared to the ground truth is not as good as what we obtained when we were using the hand data. But we can do concurrent deconvolution. And then when we do concurrent deconvolution, in green, you have the results of the concurrent deconvolution of hand and foot data. As you can see by comparing the error terms, although the hand data is higher quality than the foot data, when you add the foot data to your observations and then do concurrent deconvolution, you can improve your estimates in terms of the error terms that we are considering here. So basically, having more channels, even if they are noisy, they can help with the signal processing. So now I'm going to show you one example data set, which is from an experimental setting. So the subject was exposed to this auditory stimulation, which is supposed to result in changes in their level of arousal. And here I'm showing you 4 examples. So the first two, from female participant 1 and male participant 1, if you look at the data in gray, you see when they were exposed to the auditory stimulation. And in green, you see the basically response, the arousal events that we detected using our algorithm. So as you can see, after every auditory stimulation, we are detecting one response. Now, if you look at the second female and the second male participants, we do detect one response after every auditory stimulation, but we are detecting other responses here as well. this is because if you think of, one's mental state, of course, when they are being exposed to this auditory stimulation, they are going to have a response. But then if they are thinking about something stressful, they're going to have additional responses. And that's why, for example, that it really depends on the mental state of that subject. That's why we have additional responses, but we do recover a response right after every auditory stimulation. So comparing what we have done with, yes, please. With what was basically in the literature. So these are two different algorithms that previously existed. And if you look at our results by analyzing hand data only or food data only, they are overfitting. And basically in gray, you have the ground truth. They are putting too many impulses, versus our algorithm does not have that issue. Besides that, those existing methods only work on single channel data. However, we can do concurrent deconvolution and recover basically this underlying signal with a much better accuracy. So here in what I showed you, basically we came up with a dynamical system model, which is working for multiple locations by including time delays and also the number of sweat glands. And then we developed this concurrent deconvolution algorithm that we tested on simulated data as well as experimental data. And as you can see, if we add more channels, we can improve the quality of our inference for recovering the underlying neural stimuli. So now that we have recovered the underlying neural stimuli, what we want to do is we want to build our decoder. So we are going to, these are the arousal events that we have recovered. We are going to bin our data such that we have the largest bin that works for every individual, so that there's the same bin that is not going to result in more than one response in every bin, because we want to basically create a binary time series, which is like a point process you can think of. But we have another type of information. We also have the amplitude information. So really, you're creating a marked point process. So you have a point process which has these amplitudes associated with every event. So if you do have a response, then you're going to have basically an amplitude associated with that response. So we have been developing basically a set of these decoders. I'm just showing you one example decoder here, where we are taking this mark point process observation that we have recovered from this pulsatile physiological signal. And then we are going to link it to our hidden arousal state. So we are assuming a simple random walk model here in this example for our hidden arousal state. And then now if you think about every bin that we have formed, and then if with basically probability QK, you're going to have a response in every bin. As the underlying arousal levels increase, then the probability of having a response is going to be increasing. That's why you're using the sigmoid to link the hidden arousal state to the probability of having a response. Now, if I have a response, then I need to consider the amplitude. And then if you think of the amplitude, if someone has a higher level of arousal underlying basically this skin conductance response, the amplitude is going to be higher. So in that sense, we are using this model here to basically capture that as the hidden arousal state increases, this amplitude associated with that increases as well. So now we are taking this impulse observation, we build our decoder and estimate the hidden arousal state. So now let's look at two example basically situations that we have analyzed the data for. First, the subject was given instructions. So if I give you instructions to perform a task, you need to pay attention, which means you need to have a higher level of arousal level because you need to be engaged to then be able to perform the task. Then the subject performed this subtraction task. So basically subtracting in sevens. Again, that also requires cognitive engagement and then a higher level of arousal. Then the subject performed a Stroop test. So I don't know if anyone has heard of the Stroop test, but it is basically a color word task. So if I take the word hello, I paint it in red and I ask you the color of the paint, you can simply tell me red. Now, if I take the word green, which is associated with a color itself, I paint it in red and I ask you the color of the paint, it requires more thinking. So basically, the subject was exposed to basically these types of stimuli, that you have one word, which is associated with a color, and then it's painted in a different color, and you need to identify the color of the paint. Again, that requires thinking and a higher level of arousal. Then the subject was just doing relaxation, which doesn't require high levels of arousal. Then the subject was watching a horror movie, but they were not being quizzed afterwards. So there is no way you can check like if they were actually engaged, paying attention or not. So it really depends on each subject. So now, if you think of the first three tasks, we expect to have a higher level of arousal: instruction, subtraction, Stroop test. The second two tasks, like relaxation and watching a movie, do not necessarily require a high level of arousal. We took scene conductor's response, we did the convolution, and then we estimated the hidden arousal state. We also are refining this high arousal index. And as you can see, we are recovering a higher level of arousal during the instruction counting task and the Stroop test, and lower levels of arousal during relaxation and watching the movie. Another example here is this experiment that was done in Boston, where the subject was at rest, then the subject drove in different road conditions, then the subject was at rest again. So what you would expect is to have a low level of arousal at rest, high level of arousal during driving in different road conditions, and low level of arousal at rest. So let's see what we found. Here we have taken hand and foot data. We have done concurrent deconvolution, and then we have estimated the hidden arousal state. This is the basically hidden arousal state. During the rest period, we have a low level of arousal. During the driving, we have a high level of arousal. During the second rest period, we were expecting to see a low level of arousal. But we saw the opposite. When we went back and checked the notes from the subject, this subject actually needed to use the restroom, which is another type of stressor. So that basically the skin conductive response is capturing that. We cannot differentiate between like the types of stressors, but that is basically why this is not in agreement with like what we were thinking in the beginning. Now, to just look at the value of this concurrent deconvolution, let's look at the result of just do hand data deconvolution, because hand is better quality data compared to foot. So here we are recovering more impulses. As a result, the estimate is not as good as the one that we get when we do concurrent deconvolution, because with the hand data only, we're kind of overfitting when we're analyzing the data. So adding more channels helps. So now we are going to look at the control part first by just doing one simulation study. We have developed a set of control algorithms that I'm not going to show here. Then we are going to watch a demo that basically we did experiments with research-grade equipment and with wearable devices, using music and coffee to close the loop, to basically show that this actually can work in a real-world setting beyond basically some simulation study. So here for the control design, we're assuming the same model as before. I'm also including this environmental stimuli and the control term. But then everything else is the same. And then we have two classes of controllers that we want to design. So here, in the open loop case, what you're seeing is data from the experiment with the Stroop test, follow the relaxation. So high arousal environment followed by low arousal environment. Then in the simulation study, basically here, we have designed this inhibitory closed loop controller. So when we are in the high arousal environment, the controller is on, then automatically after some time that we move to the low arousal environment, it turns off. And then we can basically have this inhibitory effect on the arousal level compared to the open loop case. Then the other example simulation study is the excitatory case. So meaning here, if we are in the high arousal environment, the controller is off. And then after some time that we enter the low arousal environment, the controller detects it, and then we elevate the level of arousal. So let's watch this video, which is from 2021, and that was created by my former students at the University of Houston.
Stress is designated as the health epidemic of the 21st century. Stress management is crucial in enhancing quality of life and performance. It would be very impactful to have an architecture for monitoring and regulating the brain stress state for better quality of life.
At Computational Medicine Lab, we are interested in using peripheral recordings in order to infer brain activity and then close the loop with non-invasive actuation for mental well-being.
We design working memory experiments called NBAC tasks that induce cognitive stress. During the experiment, we monitor the brain responses. One back task consists whether the current stimulus matches the previous one. Similarly, the back task consists of indicating when the current stimulus matches the one from 3 steps earlier in the sequence.
The demo shows a participant performing the NBAC tasks while listening to 2 different types of music. As observed, during the experiment we collect various physiological signals along with brain recordings. Our investigation shows arousal estimation from peripheral signals resembles direct brain recordings. Comparison between performance and arousal reveals performance is highest when the arousal is within a moderate range. The results show that the average performance is lower during 3 back tasks than 1 back task while the participant was listening to a calming music. We could enhance the performance during the 3 back tasks by changing the music to a vexing one.
Research-grade devices for health monitoring are only applicable in laboratory settings. Therefore, wearable devices are practical alternatives for use in daily life. We design new sets of experiments with wearable devices for remote monitoring and regulation. We use safe actuation, such as music and coffee, to close the loop and regulate the arousal levels.
Here, a participant is performing n-back tasks. The participant will be notified to take a cup of coffee when a low arousal is detected. The result of drinking coffee is served in increasing the arousal levels.
So I don't know how we are doing on time.
We're running out of time.
So maybe then so the cortisol portion is very similar in terms of, the algorithms, but different in the sense that we include the medication dynamics. So, but like we start again from the physiology, we solve the system, and then we simplify it to this sparse input goes through our system. We have our observations. Then we have tested this on data from healthy subjects. We have also tested it on disease conditions. And then with our algorithm, we can basically detect the difference in the healthy population and the disease population. Similarly, we have been developing these filters to do estimation, but then this is based on the physiology. So for example, here we are including the circadian rhythm, and then we have a different set of observations just based on that particular data and the nature of that data. And then similarly, so we have looked at healthy population, disease population, and then we have come up with algorithms to close the loop here by considering two types of medications. So basically, the idea is very similar. The application is different. And of course, the model, everything is based on the physiology, and it's going to be different according to the physiology. But really, the main goal here is to take pulsatile physiological signals and recover the underlying sparse signaling, because the way the human body, especially the brain, works, a lot of communication and control is done using sparse signaling. So we recover that underlying sparse signal, and then with that, we build estimators to estimate hidden states related to one's brain or health condition. And then we design different controllers for some of them that it is practical to apply basically in experiments. We experiment with different types of actuators. And, the future directions include going beyond, for example, like if you're looking at the mental health condition, going beyond arousal and including something like valence, which is the positiveness or negativeness of the arousal and like the emotion, and then doing activity-based, environment-based correction to really enable smartwatches to eventually decode and regulate brain states in everyday setting. And the bigger vision is really, combining electrical and biochemical signals from wearable and portable devices and designing biomedical data science algorithms that can help us use this dynamic biosensor data to detect, manage, and prevent different disease and enable basically real-time identification of those that are at risk and deliver a precise, customized care at home outside the clinic. With that, I thank you for your attention. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Questions, if you could just repeat the questions so the microphone can hear it in the recording. Like,
Yes, okay.
yeah, go ahead if anyone has.
Yes, please.
So the end goal is to just have like a smartwatch basically tell the user when their arousal and stress levels are too low or too high, right? And if that happens, the user will get like a notification to either listen to music or drink some coffee to regulate it. Is that correct?
So the idea is that, yes, to inform basically the subject if they have high or low level of arousal, and also either like automatically use, let's say if you're in a smart home setting, just start playing the type of music that the algorithm thinks is going to be best for their mood. Or for example, let's say someone is in a meeting, then like tell them to just do breathing exercises, which kind of would be seamless. Yes, absolutely. So basically simple changes that you can make to your everyday life to regulate your arousal. And really the reason is, if you think of mental disorders, so one good way to prevent it is if someone is experiencing, symptoms of depression or like, let's say PTSD, like before you start giving them medications, if you can change simple things in their daily life, like something that we haven't done yet is also like thinking about one's diet, like sugar intake and how it can impact your arousal, right? And then, but really just moving beyond that for the healthy population, thinking of the disease problem. So, there are people who have mental disorders that they have become drug resistant. And that is a big problem because they need brain implants for their major depression. And so the idea is that if we can have such algorithms, then we can see if the medication is actually working for them before they become drug resistant and they need these brain implants. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, please.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation. And one quick comment to add to the last one. Some drug users may not be able to be treated because maybe their liver has been impacted and whatnot. So that could be another one. I'm curious whether these technologies can be embedded in, say, AR or VR technologies. So I am thinking of very highly stressful situations, say a doctor performing an operation. Maybe they need to actually see their ability because they're there for 18 hours. To the extreme, maybe it's a medical doctor in the field. So there are other things happening. And if the same setting can be used, say, for training such professionals.
Yeah, so the question was if basically this can be used in AR and VR and also for the use of physicians, both for practice and also for training. So absolutely, it can be used with AR and VR. And in terms of working with physicians, I think for training, yes, it can be used. For everyday practice, actually, I did ask a surgeon because, when they are doing, let's say, robotic surgery, it is important, like how experienced they are and like how engaged they are with the task, how fatigued they are. And what I was told was that physicians might not want to use this type of technology because then if the algorithm detects they have basically, low level of engagement, and then they are performing the operation, then it can cause basically legal issues for them. So I don't think it's practical for, medical practice, but for training to make sure, the fellow is, for example, ready to do an operation. Yes.
Thank you.
Sure. Yes, please.
In your experiments, you were using actuators which are external to the task, right? Like coffee and music.
Yes.
Have you experimented with intrinsic actuators like maybe modulation of the task to manipulate the stress response?
Yes, so the question is if we have been modulating the task to look at the stress response. Absolutely, yes. So in the video, we had this working memory experiment, the NBAC task. So basically, the subject sees this letter, and then the one back task, which is the simple task, they compare it with the previous letter. Then in the three back task, for example, which is a harder task, they compare it with what they saw 3 steps back. So like N back is basically, they should compare the current one with the one from N steps back. So in that sense, we are changing the difficulty of the particular task and then looking at the performance and also the arousal levels according to that. Yes.
I have two
Yes,
questions about the NBAC tasks.
Yes,
The
please.
first one is whether you compare the cases in which there is no music at all compared to the music.
Yes.
To understand if there was like, if you want like a distraction effect of the music. And the second one is if how much time did you leave pass from when they get coffee? Just to understand if it's like more associated with the fact that they're actually like stopping in the task to get the coffee rather than coffee itself.
Yes. So the first part of the question was if we have looked at the NBAC task performance without any type of music, and then if we have added music afterwards. So in what I showed you, we had just used like 2 types of music, but we have another set of experiments that one of my former PhD students did last fall that is not published yet. And in that, we started with no music. Then we use basically this calming music, then this high arousal music, then deep learning generated music to basically compare the results. Yes, so we have done those experiments, but they are not published yet. Then the second question related to coffee and basically how much time you're giving the subjects. So we searched the literature to see how much time it takes for the coffee to basically have an impact on individuals, and it depends on the subject. And when we were designing the experiment, also we tried to see like if that actually holds. So really, what we found, I don't remember the exact number, but maybe like about like 15 minutes it takes for the coffee to have an impact. So basically, we designed the experiment according to that. That basically we have the subject drink coffee, and then they are not performing any task during that time to just like have an increase in their arousal. And then basically we are looking at also the NBAC task performance. Yes, thanks. So any other? Yes, please.
I don't know if this is like related or not, but sometimes like, or what I'm thinking is, so what happens when like the optimization of stress becomes kind of like an actual like stress signal? Because like, I know that sometimes, or at least when I'm hearing about this, I see parallels between your work and kind of sleep tracking software with like smartwatches.
Yes.
And I know that like currently the smartwatches can like track your sleep schedule and like report back on like how low your sleep was. And like sometimes people, when they get that information, like it's supposed to help them like using tips on how to improve their sleep, but sometimes they look at that data and then they become like too stressed, or like they lose sleep because they're like trying to optimize their sleep. So would something similar happen with the stress signal? Like they become too hyper focused on like optimizing their stress that it becomes like a stress signal in and of itself?
Yes, so I think this really depends on the individual in terms of your question about whether basically if you have that information about stress, would it negatively impact you because then you keep thinking about your stress level. So maybe one approach can be like if we have like a app that goes with the wearable device, then allow for the subject to decide if they want to just get that information or just get the feedback of like what to do. But I think that is something that really depends on the individual, because like some people, if they have that information, let's say if you are working on like some coding, and then you're like also like writing a paper at the same time. So how to decide like how to switch between like the two tasks to have a better performance and then retain better arousal levels, it might be helpful to you. But then if you keep stressing about, okay, like I need to check my basically arousal level like all the time and performance, then it's going to be a big distraction, not allowing you to function. So it really depends on the personality, but I think the idea would be to eventually, have an app that the user can select what they want to get out of the app. Yes, please.
How to model decide what is the correct output? For example, if the user should drink a coffee or listen music. So is the model like receiving additional input about the user, or it's everything based on the sensor outputs?
So the question was basically, how do we decide if the subject should be drinking coffee versus listening to music? This basically, we have done experiments by having the subject perform all these different tasks. So one set was with music, then like they came another day with coffee. We also did like with perfume. We also did with like breathing exercises. So we are not there to decide like which one is better for which subject. But then if we have, a lot of data from every individual, then we can decide on like which one is better. Or also like if you are thinking of even like music, what type of music, because that is going to depend on like one's mood, and you cannot always like keep playing the same music, because if someone gets used to a type of music, then it's not going to have the same impact. And that's why like we wanted to also generate music using deep learning methods to kind of like automate that and then create new music. And that is like in like very initial stages. We just like did very few experiments with that, but we are not there yet to like decide like which one. But like, for example, like if you want to increase the level of arousal, you're going to use coffee, or you're going to use high arousal music, versus if you want to have this calming effect, you're going to use breathing exercises or relaxing music. But which one is better, I think it's going to be person specific, and we need to do a lot more like investigations.
Well, I want to stop here just because we're running over, but that was just an amazing talk.
Thank you.
So groundbreaking and impactful for society. So thank you so much. That was wonderful. And let's just give our speaker a round.
Thank you very much, everyone.